Hello, my friends, and welcome back. Thank you for joining us for another fascinating journey through history. Today, we'll uncover the remarkable story of something so ordinary that most of us rarely think about it. Yet it helped shape civilizations and change the course of human history. Let's begin. What if one of history's greatest life-saving inventions wasn't an invention at all? What if it wasn't a medicine, or a machine, or a scientific breakthrough, but an ordinary vegetable that many people once refused to eat? Today, potatoes are found on dinner tables across the world. They seem simple, common, almost ordinary. Yet behind this humble crop lies one of the most remarkable stories in human history. For centuries, kingdoms fought wars over land, gold, and trade. But one small plant quietly changed the fate of entire civilizations. It fed armies, protected communities from famine, supported exploding populations, and, according to many historians, helped sustain hundreds of millions of lives. Ironically, when Europeans first encountered the potato, many believed it was dangerous. Some thought it caused disease. Others believed it was poisonous. Few imagined that this strange underground crop would one day become one of the world's most important foods. This is the incredible story of the potato, the crop that helped feed the modern world. The story of the potato begins not in Europe, but high in the Andes Mountains of South America. Thousands of years ago, long before the rise of the Roman Empire, long before medieval castles, and even before many of the world's great civilizations reached their height, indigenous communities living in what is now Peru and Bolivia were carefully cultivating potatoes. Life in the Andes was challenging. The mountains were cold. The growing season was short. The terrain was steep and rocky. Many crops struggled to survive in such harsh conditions. The potato was different. It adapted remarkably well to the mountain climate. Over generations, indigenous farmers selected the strongest plants, gradually developing hundreds of different varieties suited to different elevations and weather conditions. The potato became far more than a source of food. It became the foundation of daily life. Families relied on it throughout the year. Communities developed methods to preserve potatoes for long periods, allowing them to survive difficult winters and poor harvests. One remarkable preservation technique produced a freeze-dried potato known as chuno, which could remain edible for years. This innovation provided an important safeguard against food shortages and demonstrated the agricultural knowledge developed by Andean civilizations. By the time the powerful Inca Empire emerged during the 15th century, potatoes had already been feeding mountain communities for centuries. The Inca cultivated vast fields across the Andes and built sophisticated farming terraces that made agriculture possible on steep mountain slopes. Potatoes became one of the empire's essential crops, helping sustain large populations living in an environment where many other plants could not thrive. For the people of the Andes, the potato was never unusual. It was dependable, nutritious, and deeply connected to their culture. They could not have imagined that one day this mountain crop would cross an ocean, transform agriculture on another continent, and eventually help feed much of the world. Everything changed in the 16th century. As Spanish explorers and conquistadors traveled across the Americas, they encountered foods unlike anything they had seen before. Tomatoes, maize, cacao, peanuts, and among them, the humble potato. At first, the Spanish were far more interested in gold and silver than in unfamiliar crops. But as they spent more time in South America, they noticed something remarkable. Entire communities depended on potatoes as a staple food. The crop grew reliably in difficult conditions and could feed large numbers of people. Recognizing its value, Spanish sailors began carrying potatoes back across the Atlantic during the second half of the 1500s. The journey marked the beginning of one of history's greatest agricultural exchanges. Along with the potato came many other American crops that would eventually transform diets around the world. When potatoes first arrived in Europe, however, they attracted curiosity more than enthusiasm. Most Europeans had never seen a plant like it. Unlike wheat or barley, potatoes grew underground. People were accustomed to harvesting grains, fruits, and vegetables that grew above the soil. Digging food out of the ground seemed unusual. In some places, potatoes were first grown not as food but as botanical curiosities in gardens. Wealthy landowners displayed them simply because they were exotic plants from distant lands. No one yet realized how important they would become. As Spanish ships continued bringing potatoes to Europe, the crop slowly spread to countries such as Italy, France, Germany, Ireland, and England. The process was gradual. Farmers experimented with the unfamiliar plant. Some found that it grew surprisingly well, even in poor soil where traditional crops struggled. Others remained skeptical and preferred to continue growing grains that had been cultivated for centuries. The potato had successfully crossed an ocean. But winning the trust of Europe would prove far more difficult. Many people looked at this strange underground crop with suspicion. Some even believed it was dangerous. And for many years, that fear prevented one of history's greatest food sources from reaching the people who needed it most. Although the potato had arrived in Europe, convincing people to eat it proved surprisingly difficult. To many Europeans, it looked strange. Unlike familiar grains or vegetables, potatoes grew beneath the soil. Their leaves and flowers resembled those of plants in the nightshade family, some of which are poisonous. This led many people to believe that potatoes must also be dangerous. Rumors spread quickly. Some claimed they caused disease. Others believed they were unhealthy or even unfit for human consumption. Without scientific knowledge to separate fact from fiction, fear often spread faster than evidence. In many regions, farmers were reluctant to grow them. Families continued relying on wheat, rye, and other traditional grains that had fed Europe for centuries. Even when harvests failed, many people still viewed the unfamiliar potato with suspicion. In some places, potatoes were fed only to livestock. Elsewhere, they were grown as ornamental plants because their flowers were considered attractive. Very few people imagined they could become a staple food. Ironically, while Europe hesitated, the potato had already proven its value in the Andes for thousands of years. Indigenous communities understood its nutritional benefits and remarkable ability to survive in difficult environments. But that knowledge had yet to convince European society. Slowly, however, attitudes began to change. Some farmers noticed that potatoes produced reliable harvests even when weather conditions damaged grain crops. Others discovered that the plants required relatively little fertile land and could thrive where many other crops struggled. These observations gradually challenged old beliefs. Still, widespread acceptance remained slow. It would take the efforts of a determined individual, someone who had seen firsthand how people could survive on potatoes, to change public opinion. His name was Antoine-Augustin Parmentier, and he was about to transform one of Europe's most misunderstood foods into one of its most important. One of the biggest turning points in the potato's history came not from a farmer. but from a prisoner. During the 7 Years' War in the 18th century, French pharmacist Antoine-Augustin Parmentier was captured by Prussian forces. While imprisoned, he was repeatedly served potatoes. At first, this seemed like poor treatment. In France, many people believed potatoes were fit only for animals or the poor. But Parmentier noticed something surprising. The prisoners who lived on potatoes did not become sick simply because of the food. In fact, they survived. The potato was nourishing, filling, and dependable. When Parmentier returned to France after the war, he became convinced that the country's fear of potatoes was based on myth rather than fact. He dedicated much of his life to changing public opinion. Parmentier wrote articles explaining the potato's nutritional value. He organized public demonstrations. He encouraged farmers to grow it. And he even gained the support of influential figures, including King Louis XVI. According to popular accounts, the king wore a potato flower in his buttonhole, while Queen Marie Antoinette decorated her hair with potato blossoms. Whether symbolic or practical, these gestures helped make the once despised plant appear fashionable rather than frightening. Parmentier also used a clever strategy to spark curiosity. He planted potato fields and had guards protect them during the day, making the crop appear valuable. At night, the guards were instructed to relax their watch, allowing curious villagers to quietly steal the potatoes and grow them themselves. Whether every detail of this story is perfectly accurate is still debated by historians, but it has become one of the most famous tales associated with Parmentier's campaign. Gradually, the public's attitude began to change. The vegetable that many had once feared slowly found its place on European farms and dinner tables. And as more people started growing potatoes, they discovered something remarkable. This simple crop could produce far more food than they had ever imagined. As more farmers began planting potatoes, they quickly realized why the crop had sustained Andean civilizations for thousands of years. Potatoes were remarkably productive. Compared with many traditional grains such as wheat or rye, they could produce far more calories from the same amount of land. For farming families, this meant that a relatively small field could feed many more people. The crop also adapted well to a wide range of climates. It could grow in cooler temperatures, tolerate less fertile soils, and often succeed in places where grain harvests were disappointing. For ordinary farmers, these advantages were life-changing. Another important benefit was that potatoes grew underground. Unlike grain fields, which were highly visible, potatoes were less likely to be destroyed or stolen during times of war. Families could leave them in the ground until they were needed, providing a natural form of food storage. The crop also required fewer processing steps than many grains. Instead of harvesting, threshing, and grinding wheat into flour, potatoes could simply be dug up and cooked. This made them an efficient and practical food for millions of households. As their popularity spread, potatoes gradually became a staple crop across much of Europe. Countries such as Ireland, Germany, Russia, and Poland increasingly relied on them to feed growing populations. The potato was no longer seen as an unusual plant from the Americas. It had become one of Europe's most valuable agricultural resources. Without realizing it, farmers were helping create one of the greatest improvements in food security the continent had ever experienced. And the effects would soon extend far beyond individual farms. The humble potato would help reshape Europe's population, economy, and future in ways few could have imagined. By the late 18th and early 19th centuries, potatoes had become a staple food across much of Europe. What had once been viewed with suspicion was now feeding millions of people every day. For countless families, The potato provided a reliable source of nutrition when other crops struggled. Because it produced high yields and could grow in difficult conditions, communities became less vulnerable to poor harvests. While famines did not disappear entirely, the widespread cultivation of potatoes helped reduce the risk of food shortages in many regions. People who once lived close to hunger now had a crop that offered greater security. The impact extended far beyond the dinner table. With more dependable food supplies, infant survival improved, families grew larger, and populations expanded rapidly. Historians estimate that Europe's population increased dramatically between the 18th and 19th centuries, and many consider the potato to have been one of the major factors behind this growth. A larger population also meant more workers. Cities expanded. Industries grew. And as the Industrial Revolution gathered momentum, millions of people were able to leave farms and work in factories, supported by a food crop that was both affordable and abundant. The potato did not create these changes on its own, but it played an important supporting role. Its influence reached into agriculture, economics, and society itself. A vegetable that many Europeans had once rejected had quietly become one of the foundations of modern Europe. And over time, its success would spread far beyond the continent, making it one of the world's most important food crops. From a remote crop grown high in the Andes Mountains, the potato went on to become one of the world's most important sources of food. Today, it is cultivated in more than 100 countries and is a staple diet for billions of people. Whether boiled, baked, mashed, roasted, or fried, the potato has become part of countless cultures and cuisines. Its journey from South America to the rest of the world transformed global agriculture in ways few other crops ever have. Historians and economists widely agree that the potato played a major role in improving nutrition, supporting population growth, and strengthening food security across continents. Over the centuries, it has helped sustain hundreds of millions of people, particularly during times when other crops failed or farmland was limited. Its importance continues today as governments and scientists recognize it as one of the world's most efficient food crops. Yet perhaps the most remarkable part of its story is how close humanity came to rejecting it. When potatoes first arrived in Europe, many people refused to eat them. They feared them. They misunderstood them. Some even believed they were poisonous. If those beliefs had never changed, history might have unfolded very differently. Countless lives that were sustained by this humble crop might have faced a far harsher future. The potato did not win battles. It did not rule kingdoms. It did not invent machines or medicines. Instead, it accomplished something even more fundamental. It fed people, generation after generation, quietly, reliably, and in doing so, it became one of the greatest unsung heroes in human history.